first, straight up looks like a Greek temple, doesn't it? We got a pediment here, and then we have, what kind of column capitals are those? Tell me. Yes, Ionic. So we have these gorgeous Ionic capitals that rest under a pediment. The columns appear to wrap around, but they're not freestanding as we go around. I'll talk about that in more detail. So that looks very Greek, right? Then it looks very Etruscan because we have a podium and a central staircase, and we only have columns in the front porch. Here we are looking at the floor plan. Ooh, okay. So I said to notice those columns that go around the temple. They are attached to the walls of the central room called a cella. You can call it a naos if you want to. Remember, the Greeks called it the naos. The Latin word for it is cella. So we have a cella in the middle. And then those columns go around. Now we have freestanding columns, which we're very used to seeing, and there they are. And then there are engaged columns. Do you remember that term? We talked about it earlier this semester. An engaged column is a column that is still attached to the wall. So an engaged column is not single and fancy free. Instead, I'm engaged, I'm attached to this wall. So we have what looks like a Greek temple with the columns going all the way around, but they're not freestanding columns all the way around. Instead, we have freestanding columns in the front, and we have these engaged columns in the back. Now, the porch, very similar to what we saw in the Etruscan, it doesn't have a pronaos and an epinaos, that balance that we saw in the Greeks. So we see in the Romans this beautiful hybrid of Greek architecture and Etruscan architecture. And doesn't that make sense? They're on the Italian peninsula. They were once ruled by the Etruscans. They absorb the Etruscan territory, including all the art and architecture, and they are fascinated with the Greeks. Let's look at it again over here. There we go. So those are the engaged columns that wrap around. Here's another view of it. You can really see that podium of the temple itself, right? Now, the material used here is also interesting because the Romans are all about efficiency. This is one thing that you need to know about the Romans, is that they're all about efficiency. They like the look of Greek marble in their temples, but marble is expensive. They do have marble quarries that are accessible on the Italian peninsula, but stonework is expensive not only in terms of the raw material, bringing it to the site, and then hiring stonemasons to craft and carve it out. It's very expensive. So instead, they use local limestone, and then to get that beautiful bright white marble finish, they cover it in plaster. They cover it in stucco, basically. Stucco is like it's very common. You see it in a lot of the houses around here. That kind of plastered exterior on houses, right? So they liked to use the local stone, cheaper, not as much to export or import, and then make it look like marble. And they would polish it up or plaster it up into this, faux marble technique. It's imitation marble. So what we're looking at here are the flecks of that plaster. The statuary of a Roman temple would typically be along the roof line, like an Etruscan temple. If it did have any decorative elements in the pediment, they were usually low relief panels of bronze that were gilded in gold and not as elaborate as what we are used to in the Greek world. Here is the Temple of Portunus after it had a recent refresh. Yes, it went through a not remodel, what's the word? Restoration, that's it. It went through a recent restoration, and so some of the textbooks will have the old, dirty, stuccoed plaster version of the temple, but this is after the restoration of the temple, and you can see how they tried to bring back the luster of that imitation marble plaster that it would have originally had. And in this form, you can really see that hybrid element of the Greek and the Etruscans in a Roman temple.